Yeah. You already know I'm trained to go. It's about 8 o'clock for my favorite show. All the latest news on your radio. Yeah. Had to start a wave, then I changed the flow. Y'all know who the best is, the Urban Collective.
All right, what's up, everybody? It is your girl Bernadine Truth alongside.
It's your man NIC.
Yes, and we are the Urban Collective Show. We hope that you all enjoyed the week that was conversation, checking in with your amazing host of the Urban Collective Show. It is that time of our segment where we go into our celebrity guest conversation, introducing you all to an amazing mogul in the city of Boston, helping you all to stay connected and to stay inspired. I am truly honored and excited to introduce you all to Dr. Atyia Martin, who is the CEO and founder of ACES Incorporated, an education social enterprise with a mission to activate the power of consciousness, critical thinking, and community to catalyze transformative action that advances racial equity and resilience. All ACES provides its clients with speaking engagements, coaching, strategic workshops, and an online learning community. dynamicimpact.com. And it's spelled differently, so I'm going to have Atyia spell all that out for all of you in a little bit. Mm-hmm. Additionally, Dr. Martin serves as a distinguished senior fellow at Northeastern University's Global Resilience Institute. Her previous professional roles included Chief Resilience Officer for the City of Boston, Director of the Office of Public Health Preparedness at the Boston Public Health Commission, and adjunct faculty in the Master of Homeland Security program at Northeastern University. Dr. Martin has also worked at the Boston Police Department's Boston Regional Intelligence Center, City of Boston's Mayor's Office for Emergency Management, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, also known as the FBI, the Air Force as active duty assigned to the National Security Agency, and the Initiative for a Competitive Inner City. Dr. Martin and her husband were born and raised in Boston, where they currently live. They have 5 children, 2 of which are still at home, providing clients with a controlling hand to deal with challenging subjects and situations. Without further ado, I would like to introduce you all to Dr. Atyia Martin.
Oh my goodness, I can't believe you read that whole
thing. Yes, you have to know what you do. I'm also like, yes, you do amazing things.
Yeah. Everybody that comes on to, they're like, once you hear your bio is very different. Right. Compared to like writing it and everything. So it's good.
And watching it happen. But Atyia, you've done a lot in the city of Boston.
Yes, I worked for the city for about 12 years in different city agencies. And it was quite the experience. I worked under Mayor Menino and Mayor Walsh.
Wow. Oh, okay. Two different.
Yeah, I was like, how was that?
I was gonna say, I was just like, well, before we jump into the interview completely, we want you to also just say hi to the audience, to let the people know your voice, who you are, maybe something that's not included in your bio. Just check in.
Well, I think the most important thing about me was included in my bio, which is my family. That is the most important thing in my life. My husband and my children, and all of the our grandchildren. We have 2, and so I would say that. And the second thing is I own the fact that I am African American, that I'm part of a larger Black diaspora, and that means a lot to me, and it means a lot in terms of who I include in my close network.
I love it. Thank you so much. And I love that you bring it back to family, because again, that indicates what you value, right? And what you're rooted in, and what grounds you. So, and that's super important when people really explore what they can do out in the world, but it's just, again, what makes sense for you back home. So thank you for that.
Yes, I mean, and to be honest, like, we live in a crazy world. As much beauty as there's just as much chaos, if not more, sometimes it feels like. And when we aren't anchored in our own culture, collectively, and our own family culture, then it's easy to just get blown in whichever way the wind is blowing. So.
Right, absolutely. No, I love it. Thank you so much.
I kind of always like to go back with guests when they come on. So when you were a teen in high school, what did you picture yourself wanting to be? And is that something that you actually ended up in, or no? Completely. All right, so let's go there.
Right. What did young Atyia want to do?
Young Atyia had Phases.
We're younger.
Okay.
Thank you. Let's see, I wanted to be an architect,
Okay.
an engineer at one point. I wanted to go into communications.
Okay.
I grew up at WILD, and so I thought that's what I was going to do, some intersection between communications and business, which kind of, in some ways, is relevant to some aspects of my current life.
Yeah.
But I always wanted to go into business. So in that regard, yes. But all the other long list of things, definitely not.
Not?
I didn't do. I never became. Oh, I want to also be an ornithologist when I was in elementary school.
Really?
Yeah.
How did you get into
that?
that? Where did that come from?
Yeah.
We did. When I was in elementary school, we had a visitor, and she taught us about birds and all these things. And I said, what do you do exactly? And she was like, well, I'm an ornithologist, and this is what I do. And I was obsessed with ornithology from second grade, probably all the way through fifth grade.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I'm a big nerd. If none of that doesn't tell you anything,
I love that.
no, I'm a huge nerd.
I love that. When I start speaking about nerd stuff, they just look at me like I'm crazy. Like,
No, because some of the things that I see talks about, I'm like, nope, never heard of it. Don't even know where you go with it. Talk to me about race. Talk to me about education. Talk to me about family.
There's a lot more to the world.
Other
There's a lot
planets,
more,
going to outer space, living there for 50 years. Never thought about it. Just wasn't really not where I want to go.
So what was it in college or post college? Did you decide that this is where I'm gonna go, and ended up changing your mind on what you wanted to focus on?
No, it kind of was a series of unpredictable events. I won't call them unfortunate. They were actually very fortunate. I was older when I went into the military, so I had already done 3 years of college.
Gotcha.
I had been working full-time and going to school full-time, and I had a really, really good job. I ended up getting laid off, and then I took another position, and when I was in my second position, by this time I had moved from Boston to Atlanta.
Okay.
So I was living in Atlanta, and I was working for the small mom and pop company that had 2 magazines.
Okay.
One you will have heard of, and one you will not have heard of. And the first one, I'll tell you the one you haven't heard of. The one you haven't heard of is Progressive Farmer.
Okay, definitely.
That was one of their magazines.
Okay.
Can't even go with it.
Yeah, Progressive Farmer magazine. And the second one is Southern Living magazine.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah.
Okay.
So they got bought out by AOL Time Warner at some point. So I'm dating myself. But while I was there, I ended up getting recruited into the Air Force. And
Really?
yes.
I actually wanted to go into the Air Force. I wanted to be a pilot when I was younger.
Really?
And then my vision was all messed up. I'm like,
Yep.
So I had to call it quits. And I actually wanted to go to school for that, but it was just the cost. You've heard of Embry Riddle. So I got in, wanted to go, had a partial scholarship. Even with that, it was just still
too much.
too much.
No,
Very
it's a lot.
expensive. I was like, you know what? Yeah, I don't want to come out of college owing a house.
And that's not even just tuition, right? So you have to think about the books. You have to think about
and travels all the way down south and
Yeah.
everything also.
Right.
So
Flight time.
yeah, so I was like,
But tell me more. So what were you doing with the small company to then be recruited into the Air Force?
Nothing related to the military at all.
Okay.
It was happenstance that I ran into a recruiter at an event. I think it was an event we were hosting, and he was talking about all the opportunities, and he mentioned, that they needed folks who could reach a certain score on the entrance exam into the military, and if you could get a certain score, then you could pretty much pick whatever you wanted to do in the military. So I was like, I'll try, so I got a really high score and was able to pick anything I wanted to do. So I said I want to learn languages because I already knew Spanish and French, and so I went in, took a second test, because in order to be a linguist you have to take another test to prove you can learn a language. And
Makes
so it's like this fake language, and they give you this booklet to fill out,
kind of like decipher and everything.
and you have to decipher
Okay.
it, and that's what determines whether or not you can become a linguist.
Wow. Then I'm just so so many questions. I'm just so fascinated because I'm like, okay, so you went to college, then you traveled, and you were in Atlanta, and then you worked for a magazine, and then from the magazine you did the Air Force, and then from there it seems like all of your roles up until now that you're an entrepreneur with your own business have been government, city related.
Mm-hmm.
So was the transition into the Air Force like an introduction into a field, or was that also like coincidental as far as all of these pivotal roles you've had for the city and the state?
Very coincidental. And it's funny because I've had a lot of jobs before I even worked at the job that I got laid off from and worked for the magazine. I mean, I worked, I mentioned WILD, which for those folks who don't know, WILD was the only black-owned, black-ran radio station in the city of Boston. It was literally the centerpiece that brought the black community together and lots of other communities, but it was really centered on black culture. And you could listen to all kinds of music, all kinds of black music. Everything from oldies all the way to reggae, like everything. Rarely hip hop, but they did hip hop too. They had a little segment. T. Clark, I think, used to do that. But at any rate, so I was a network administrator before for a company. So I've done all kinds of stuff before then. And then once I went into the military, I think that was my foray into government. It was my entrance into the intelligence world, the top secret world, which is very different. You can't take your work home, right? You can't talk about your work. You can't you lie. You're instructed to lie.
Yeah, I was gonna say, how do you deal
balance?
with that, having a family and everything like that?
And living
Oh, did you have a
secrecy?
family by then?
I did.
Okay.
So my husband and I were married by then. Our youngest son I had just given birth to our youngest son, and it was hectic. My husband was here in Boston with the older three. They were still little, but the older three, and I was in at Fort Meade, which is in between Baltimore and Maryland. And I'd probably say, at the time, my strategy was always just to put my head down and just do stuff. Like, I didn't think about it in the moment how difficult it was or anything like that. I just figured out, like, here's where I'm at, here's where I'm trying to go. I'm gonna get from here to there and just do whatever work it takes to get there. And so looking back, it was crazy because I started work at like 6:30, so I had to drop my son off at like 6 at the daycare on base and get over to the office, go through armed security and all the top secret stuff, all the checkpoints. So you have to go through the checkpoint to the military base checkpoint to get to the top secret checkpoint, which is a whole separate one. And once you're in there, there's no cell phones, there's no any of that stuff. All day.
What if something happened to your son? Well,
They would have to call.
Right.
They would have to call.
Somebody has to come get you.
Office number.
That's it's very different.
Very, very different. And we used to have a joke that you could tell. So the three groups of people that worked at NSA were military, active duty military, civilians who worked for the federal government, and contractors. And it's about equally a third.
Right.
And we had a joke that you could tell when the civilians first started working for NSA by the way they dressed.
Okay.
Because once you're in that world, it's like you get submerged into it. And if you have to work overtime, you're,
So what would you dress like?
Military uniform.
Okay, all the time.
All the time. Even when I was pregnant, they have a pregnant maternity battle dress uniform.
Wow.
I've never
super
seen
sexy.
That. Yeah.
Battle dress, you said battle dress uniform. That might be. It's like, what's up? Hey. Comes for me. But so tell talk to us a little bit more about what it was like to be in a role that required you to live a life so privately, right? But that occupied a lot of your time, and then you were to then kind of unplug and disconnect in a way to be a nurturer and a provider. And
I'll be honest, it actually was a lot easier than a regular job because I could just leave it at work. No one was gonna call me unless there was an emergency or if I didn't show up. So there was this thing where if you were a certain number of hours late, they'd send the guys in black to your house. to
like
make where you at.
Yep.
You're supposed to be here, and make sure you didn't get some foreign government didn't snatch you up or whatever. But beyond that, it was like once I left, I was done,
right?
And I could live my non-military, non-NSA life, and so I think that it made it a lot easier. The hardest part was being away from the other part of the family, and I'll say this: my husband is an amazing human being, which is why I married him. He used to drive every 2 weeks from Boston to Baltimore.
That's
From
a drive.
Friday night, right? He would leave, he'd get off work, get in the car, drive through all the way until he got there. He'd sleep Friday night into Saturday morning, get up, and we'd have Saturday and Sunday, and he'd leave Sunday night and go to work on Monday. And he would do that every 2 weeks.
Every 2 weeks.
Every 2 weeks. So that made it a lot easier.
Yeah. That was good. I was like, so how did you guys interact?
How did that work?
How did that work? Do you feel like, I think in conversations with folks, distance either brings you further apart or brings you closer together.
Yeah.
What would you say the take on it was for you?
I'd say further apart or closer together. So I'd probably say closer together. I think for us, we already had a pretty strong relationship. It was built on friendship and us both being nerds, and we're a lot alike in a lot of ways. Which can be crazy and annoying sometimes.
I got my own person.
Yes, I am my own person. But I think that really made that experience of being apart for so long easier, a lot easier.
Yeah.
That we had a strong foundation, and we talked a lot. When I was in basic training, which was awful, so I was in not basic training, but after basic training, when I then went to my training school, which was a year long. That's how long it took to learn Serbian and Croatian. 7 hours a day, every day. It was awesome, with native speakers. Yeah, it's crazy. I think about they put you all in the middle of it.
Fully immersed. Yeah.
Yes, and probably about a third of the class, only a third of the class made it all the way through and passed the test and all that. So it was crazy. But at any rate, when I was there for that year, when he couldn't come every 2 weeks to California because that's where I was, he would write me an email every day on his lunch break, so that by the time I had my lunch break, I would go and there would be an email waiting for me every day.
Stop.
I know.
This is one of the things that melt my heart. No, because he didn't have to do that.
No, he didn't.
Y'all didn't have to communicate that way.
No, but that's the kind of relationship we had. So we're big nerdy family.
Lovable people, though. Right? It's like the love and the affection is there, which is beautiful because I think too sometimes we live in a world where people think black love is not a thing that exists, right? Or healthy relationships with people of color is not something that exists. And so to be able to see that, and I don't know the racial identity of your partner.
He's black.
He's black, so
he's blackity black.
Black of the berry, sweet as the juice. So like to hear that, it does warm my heart because I'm like, no, you are a woman of color in a relationship, married with children, doing a long distance, following your professional endeavors with a partner who's still supportive and able to have those moments where you're able to be like, babe, I see you. Like, I only see you, right? Like, black love is real and black love is out there. It's the person who's single and figuring it out. It's hard, but it's there,
So, being in the intelligence field and being a minority.
Oh, boy.
How was that?
Honestly, the military is a pretty diverse place.
Yes.
So it wasn't as bad. What was interesting though was the diversity of people who were in the military. So so a lot of the when I was in California for the year when I was in language training, I was one of the flight leaders of a flight of 70 young ladies. And all the young ladies who were white, there was not all of them, but there was a percentage of the young ladies who were white who were from the Midwest.
Okay.
And they had never seen a black person in real life before. And they were doing all of the faux pas, like the stuff you just don't do.
What was that? That was the first thing that came in my mind. I was like, don't touch my hand.
And I used to have to be like, first of all, no. Second of all, don't ever ask. another human being if you could touch
We're
their
not-
hair.
you
I don't
can't
care
pet
what
us.
color they are. Just don't do it.
Oh my god.
Just don't do it, and definitely don't do it to a woman of color
Yeah.
Right.
because it
It's
could be
a lot.
Yes.
So that's number one. And I think I think part of it was coaching a lot of ignorant, inexperienced white young ladies into being a little more conscious, more sophisticated in their understanding, not just of like race and racism and that kind of stuff, but also just of the world.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, like relationships and like all kinds of stuff. So I was one of the older folks. There were very few of us who were old enough to go out and get a drink.
Okay.
So like these were, you know,
Like
Yeah,
young.
I graduated from high school and came into the military young.
Right,
Yep.
right. You were educated. You were really schooling them,
Yes.
right, on life and culture and
Yeah.
perspective.
So that was probably the biggest piece. And then when I was at NSA, I did have a interesting incident with a master sergeant. I'll never forget. I was pregnant with Ryan, our youngest son, and he sat me down and he said, you could get out the military because you're pregnant. I'm like, yeah, I know. He was like, so that you could go be with your family. I'm like, yes, I know. He was like, you should really, consider that. I was like, thank you. And he was like, no, but really, you should consider it. And he was being really kind of aggressive. And I said, listen, you don't know me. I know I look 12 to you, but I'm older than I look. And furthermore, I have made a decision in partnership with my family. This is what we're doing. So thank you, but no thank you.
Right.
And he left me alone after that. He was very angry, but he was a black man. And I thought it was really fascinating how the intersection of racism and sexism happening in that moment.
Yeah.
Right? It was like the internalization of it, but then also, this thing like, but you're pregnant. So like, you should just like go home and,
Kick your feet
fulfill
up.
these stereotypical gender performative duties.
go in the kitchen and like do some stuff.
Right.
I'm like, I do that. And
Like, is your family
I
eating
can
when you're
do it.
over here?
Exactly.
Right. And it's just like, no, it's possible.
Wow.
But talk to me. I mean, the family dynamic and the racial dynamic is so real. And again, you're saying a number of different things that I'm really excited to touch on as our conversation continues. But how did you transition into the work in the military to then assume all of these other positions and come back to Boston or Massachusetts, right?
Yes.
To then be in this local community.
So when I came, I did one tour of duty, which was 4 years. I came home. Before I left the military, probably about 6 months before I got out, I had started applying for jobs because when you have a top secret clearance, you actually are qualified for certain types of jobs. Problem was I was going back to Boston, and there aren't a lot of top secret jobs in the area. So I had applied for the FBI and didn't know if I had gotten a job. Even 6 months later, getting out the military, I hadn't heard from the FBI, from the FBI. So when I came home, I took a month just to like decompress and get our house together and like do all that kind of stuff, just kind of be mom and be a regular person, not wearing a uniform for a little while. And then I temped for a while as I was trying to figure out what in the world I was going to do, because my resume was kind of like scary, right, for a regular job. It's like I'm applying to be an executive assistant, and it's like, and I have a top secret clearance for,
Like, she can't know about what we do with you.
So I could imagine being on the hiring end of that. That would be kind of weird. But I think by that January, and here's what I will share, because I think sometimes we romanticize things, and that time frame was hard, right? So I'm working temp jobs, which were fine, and I was being paid decently. Okay. But still had bills to pay and all that. So I would work temp jobs, and I would also deliver newspapers, and not like I'm on a bike delivering papers, but like these are the massive orders for hospitals, for businesses, and so you would go over to over in South Boston, over by Dry Dock Ave. And there was a warehouse in there, and there would be like dozens and dozens of us. And you would get so I had the Longwood medical area. So you get your list of commercial and residential subscribers to all these different newspapers. You bundle it all up, fill up your whole car with all this stuff, and then go do it. Used to have to get there at 4:30 in the morning, right? So to get up, you know, we used to have to be there at 4. So I would get up at like 3 in the morning, head over there, get the car loaded up, make sure I was clear about my route, see if anything had changed, and then you'd have to get it done before 7.
Okay.
7 a.m.
Because by 7 there's traffic and you're not
getting
gonna
anywhere.
finish. So I did that and then I would come home and I would take a shower and I would get the kids ready to go to school, drop them off, and then go to my temp job. And I did that for months and months and months.
Oh wow.
And so, you know, when we talk about kind of sacrifice for family and like what it takes to kind of do things, my point in sharing that is it's not always sexy and attractive. Like there's struggle.
Absolutely.
That's okay and that's normal. We should normalize the struggle so that folks don't feel like that's something weird or something's wrong with them because they're struggling. Because we always, you know, over romanticize everything, trying to look like a rap video.
Absolutely. Right.
I just have to put that out there.
It's not the real. It's not real.
It's not real.
It's not real for everyone.
And then so after that was about 4 months, I ended up getting a call from the FBI, and they were like, "Okay, you got it." And I was like, "Oh, it's about damn time."
That's almost a year. That's almost a year. That's 10 months.
Yes, that took forever. So then I went in. I had to do another lie detector. Even though I already had a top secret clearance, I didn't have FBI top secret clearance, so I had to go through their process. So that's kind of how I came home. I only stayed at the FBI for about 1.5 years because they didn't keep a commitment to me.
Okay.
So I took a job that was below my experience level because that's all they had available at the time.
And were you promised?
And I was promised when the full analyst position came available, like bam, you'd slide up in there and it'd be all good.
Heard it before.
So I'm making so little money that I'm working. I'm getting special permission from leadership and from HR to work on Saturdays to make extra money.
Wow.
So when the position became available, they said, "Oh, you know, well, we have some applicants from DC," and I was like, "What does that have to do with me?"
And I'm here.
I'm here.
I'm here.
Well, DC is like
Right.
HQ
Right.
is.
Right.
They're like, you know, we can give some folks from headquarters. And so once that happened, ironically, I was a company had found my old resume online from when I was first looking for jobs.
Oh wow. Okay.
And had reached out to me and recruited me to come work for them. So there was a business, a contracting, a consulting company that had a contract with the police department to set up the Boston Regional Intelligence Center.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So this was right after, well, not right after 9/11, but this was after Homeland Security grant funding became available. Before then, it wasn't available.
After 9/11, a lot of stuff.
Yes.
Right.
So the police department was trying to figure out what does it mean to do intelligence at the local level? What does it mean to do it in a way that protects civil liberties? Like what kind of systems do we need? Policies, process, all that stuff. So me and a team of 3 other people, one other person who was a Serbian Croatian linguist in the Army, random,
full
the most
circle.
random thing, came in and helped set up all the process and policies and procedures and connections to the alphabet soup 8 federal agencies and got them set up to get a secret room with SCIFs, sensitive compartmented information facility at the secret level. At the police department. So I stayed there for a while, and then there was a threat when Homeland Security money first came out that the federal government wasn't going to fund it anymore. And so we were all like, well, we don't know if we're going to have a job. So I ended up getting a call from the Mayor's Office of Emergency Management, who wanted me to come to work for them.
Okay.
So I did that, and I never worked in emergency management, so I do a matrix upload before every job, and I obsessively read everything I can before I go in, so that I know the language and all that stuff. And so what was fascinating about that was apparently nobody else had done that in that office at the
Oh,
time.
okay.
So
Here I
Hey.
knew, and I knew all the jargon and all
Right.
the stuff, and I was like, no,
Y'all don't know
do
this?
that?
Y'all
Okay. All right, so then
Let me teach you how you do it.
So I got all the crappy jobs, all
Mm.
the things that nobody else wanted to do, but were actually really great for my career.
Mm.
So the emergency operations plan, which is for every city has to have an emergency operations plan.
Yeah.
It
Take something.
dictates
Yeah.
who's responsible for what things when emergencies happen across all city departments, but also the private sector, any other partners, what everyone is supposed to do together with each other, what their individual responsibilities are, how they work together when there's an emergency, how we practice together, how we're supposed to recover from emergency. So all of that's supposed to be in the emergency operations plan. And here they gave it to this random me, and we're like, here, you go to these meetings now, and you like figure out how to like make this
Make
thing
this work.
make
Who were
this
you
a real
meeting
thing.
with? Who were some of the people in the room?
So it was Boston EMS, the Public Health Department, Boston Transportation Department, Public Works, Police Department, Fire Department, and I'm sure I'm missing at least one, but it was like a small, it was kind of like the core group of folks who would be
Right.
most directly involved.
Yeah.
Like
and
first
the
responders in
emergencies and
certain
everything.
ways,
Yeah.
right?
And then after we finished the draft, then we had to roll it out to all the other city departments to make sure that we had captured everything properly. So that was one thing that nobody else wanted to do, that was considered a pet project of the director, even though it was the emergency management office,
Yeah.
and we're supposed to
To
do
do
emergency
it,
operations planning.
Right.
It's
And
like
that
a
is
thing.
exactly what you were
That's
doing.
what I was doing. And then the second project I had that nobody wanted was public-private partnerships. And so we ended up partnering with Boston EMS and the Public Health Department on bringing the CDC Foundation into Boston. So they gave us funding to basically bring together the private sector, nonprofits, government, to figure out how we could help each other and better coordinate when there are emergencies.
Okay.
So we hosted, the first conference was almost 300 people from all of those different sectors. And then we looked at, what folks had to offer, what they struggled with when emergencies happened, and how we could help each other. We did a follow-up summit where we brought folks back together. We said, leading up to the summit, here's a commitment sheet. What are the things that you can offer, whether it's service, products, whatever, within your wheelhouse, your sphere of influence, what you do that you would be able to offer the city as part of an emergency. And we got over 100 commitment letters from different organizations saying, these are the things we can offer. Everything from nonprofits who did services like Meals on Wheels,
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
all the way to refrigerated trucks, which is especially important after the Chicago heat wave of 1995. So they had over 700 people die in the span of just several days, which was swept under the rug for many, many
Yeah, I was like,
years.
that's not even a story I think I know.
No,
Yeah,
it was
most
swept under the
people-
rug for many years. It wasn't until a researcher went, I won't get really nerdy and start name dropping researchers and stuff, but a researcher went back and did almost like a social autopsy of what happened with the heat wave. And one of the things was because of the overflow of dead bodies, the morgue was overwhelmed, and so they had to bring in refrigerated trucks to put bodies
preserve the
in,
bodies.
to preserve the bodies until they could finish doing autopsies. So, so refrigerated truck seems like a random thing, but like there's a story behind like all of the things people were offering, what we were looking for. But at any rate, so and then the last project that was super not sexy that nobody wanted was the emergency notification system.
Okay.
So the
Which
city,
is a game changer.
Which is a game changer. So the city had this thing that looked like MS-DOS. I'm dating myself again. But if you have ever seen MS-DOS, it's a black screen with a bunch of colorful text. It looks like Nintendo.
Typing code.
Right, typing in code. Like that's what it looked like. And this was, 2000. We're in the 2000s at this point.
Wow, and they're still using it?
And it was still, it wasn't an MS-DOS system, but it was awful.
Looked like, okay.
It was awful.
All right.
I don't even know how. anyways, it was awesome. So helped find a new system that was more modern, and then got it set up with the city, and then worked with all the city departments to implement it for each of their departments. Train them on how to use it. So that was an amazing experience. That's actually the other way I got to know a lot of city departments, leaders in the city.
By meeting them. Is that what led to our phones and us receiving these automatic notifications of when something is taking place?
That's separate. That came just probably about 5 or 6 years ago.
Yeah, that was
federal government.
Yeah, that was federal mandated.
Finally caught up and thought it was a good idea. So why make it at each individual jurisdiction level?
Exactly.
But what it does then is allow for local jurisdictions to piggyback off of those same systems when there's an emergency, as opposed to every jurisdiction having to do their own separate thing at a basic level. And now most jurisdictions still have their own system, because they use it for more than just the big emergencies. But at any rate, here we are. So
how did you get to all ACEs? So in all that you do,
all that I did,
you brought it back to race and culture and conversation.
So it was funny because as I was working emergency management, I started my master's program because there was this thread, this theme happening. So when I worked for the consulting firm, I was finishing my bachelor's degree because I hadn't finished it, but I had enough credits for 2 bachelor's degrees after all that work in the military.
Nice.
So, and I was taking my last class to get my bachelor's degree, but the other consultants made more money than me because they had bachelor's degrees and for no other reason.
Yeah.
So I was like, fine, did that, done. Then I'm in this office. I'm the oldest person in the office, only one with a family, only one with any real experience. And I shouldn't say real experience, but experience, long-term experience under pressure in these kind of environments. And everyone else was making more money than me. All of the other regional planners were making more money than me because I didn't have a master's degree.
It's always something.
So the credentials, the pieces of paper that mean nothing, because apparently I'm still Atyia, nothing changed. So I got my master's. I started doing my master's program, and as part of that, I got really interested in social vulnerability. Like, what are the existing real life circumstances of people that impact what happens after disasters, right? Because you know, and this was early in the days, like they were just starting to look at this stuff back then. And what they were finding is that the people who suffer the most in day-to-day life, race, class, gender, disability, all that stuff, were the same people who struggle the most after disasters. Not rocket science, but it was a connection that still to this day, some people have it's like something they never heard before, never understood before. It's like an epiphany moment for people. It's like, no, it makes sense. But it's because the emergency management field has for so long been only focused on emergencies and not the bigger picture, and that what happens in an emergency is not an isolated incident. And that we can pretty much predict the impact of and the consequences of most emergencies with our understanding of what's happening in communities today. The people, the infrastructure, the economy, all that stuff. Predictors
We'll talk about that.
What you're going to see when there's a disaster. So all the things that you see happening after emergencies, Katrina, all predictable, right? Too many people who were renting, living in communities where the landlords were absent, ignored. And so, and then you layer race on top of that, right? And so now you have, you see the output of what happened after Katrina, which is predominantly Black people suffering the most, Black people, and then immigrants.
Yes.
And then when you layer on top other categories of people who were incarcerated, a lot of people died unnecessarily who were incarcerated, mistreated, just all types of stuff. There's a great report called Broken Promises that the ACLU did that talks about a lot of the post-Katrina lawsuits that happened because of how wrong people were treated, right? Everything from the prisoners, a lot of examples of prisoners, but there's also other reports that talk about how immigrants were treated, right? You know, folks thinking they weren't citizens and that therefore they didn't allowed to use the same way, right? Or and then after the disaster, that they then couldn't get access to services that were for citizens. And so they were turned away because they had an accent. And so there's all of these instances of how this plays out. I mean, you can even look at, I think it was maybe 4 months ago, there was a report that came out that showed that all of the money that went to replacing homes after disasters were predominantly going to white people with a lot of money. And so it's like, okay, what's that about, right? Like, what does that mean? Where did that come from? It shouldn't be surprising, right? Because that's how we value things, and particularly when you talk about an urban environment where you have most people rent. And if your landlord decides, same thing with Katrina, if your landlord decides like they don't care about the house, then where are you supposed to go?
Right.
And so that you have all of these layers, and I started to get kind of obsessed with it. And then race kept showing up as a thing, and it connected back to kind of my family life, which is, you know, my husband and I always had this conversation about race and racism and what it meant for our own experiences and our kids and how we're supposed to raise them amidst all this ridiculousness, and how to keep them anchored in a way where they don't lose themselves while they're out in the world. And so that I ended up bringing a lot of that into the work as I thought about, well, how do we think differently about how we plan for emergencies that acknowledges that today, what's happening right now and the struggles people are having, that we need context on that as emergency managers if we're going to really do our jobs well. If we want to win, if we want to be successful, which is about protecting people's lives, protecting property, protecting livelihoods, then we need to have these understandings about things.
What's been the response? So when you're bringing race to the forefront, and I would imagine, you know, you're bringing race to the forefront of people who might be predominantly white or don't look like the population that you're addressing, and you're saying, hey, we're intentionally neglecting these people, and the proof is in the pudding, right? Like, you see it in who's being saved and who's being financially supported and all of that. Like, what are we going to do about it? You know, like, what have people's responses been, and how do you even get them to go there?
So it's a skill that I didn't have at first. And I think because we're so, you know, my husband and I were always so comfortable talking about these issues at home, but to bring them into the workplace, right, was like, well, what kind of language do I use? Like, I don't even know how to talk to these people about racism, and like, I don't even know what their understanding of this stuff is. Like, and I hadn't studied racism in the way that I have studied it since, and so it was kind of goofy at first, right? Like, you know, I'm trying to connect it to connect race and racism to under the umbrella of social vulnerability, to show that you know, when you look at all of the different social factors that create these negative outcomes, that race is the biggest determinant, right? So I had to work to get that language to be able to communicate well, and so I fumbled a lot in the beginning. But then I was able to get the language together, and then when I did my doctorate program, like I went even deeper into trying to understand how all of these different social categories were connected to one another, which is and while I was doing that, I was at the Boston Public Health Commission, at the Office of Public Health Preparedness, and you asked me how did I get to all ACEs earlier, and so when I was at I'm taking a detour. When I was at the Office of Public Health Preparedness, it basically is emergency management for public health and health care for the city of Boston. So all the hospitals, all the community health centers, all of the long-term care folks, like rehabilitation centers, nursing homes, home health, home care, like everything you can think of, dialysis centers that aren't a part of those things, because they're serving a lot of the most vulnerable people. And then when you look, it's a lot of people who look like us. And so in that role, I experienced at a much closer to the ground level how people were being harmed after emergencies, both by the emergency itself, but then by our ability to meet their needs or to not meet their needs afterwards. And I think I got even more interested in this intersection of race and figure out what does it mean to do racial equity, right? So we live in the problem space a lot when it comes to racism. We talk about racism. We just talk about it forever. But like, what do you do about it?
What about the action?
Like, so what does it mean to do something about it?
Right.
And so for me at the time, it was like, well, based on everything that I'm seeing, making sure that communities that we're supposed to be serving are part of the decision-making process of what we are doing, right? We shouldn't be doing stuff to them, right? We should be working with them. And so we built out a whole community resilience program and partnered with a lot of community organizations in the city to start by developing relationships and let them know that we're real, really care really about this, and that we're not going anywhere. But then also we were able to get some Homeland Security grant funding after the marathon bombings. So we coordinated the whole public health and healthcare response after the marathon bombings. And that was like a year and a half. We were involved in everything. And most folks only know about what happened in the movie, like the immediate aftermath. But after the first week or two, like most folks don't know.
Yeah, people move on.
And you're still dealing with
people mourning, people healing.
Yeah, you're still dealing with over 200 survivors, right? Who have who still have medical needs, who still have psychological trauma, who are just all types of things. Now, what was really fascinating is we had all these resources pouring into Boston, right, to support all these marathon survivors, who I ended up developing a lot of personal relationships with a lot of them because I ended up being in close proximity. And at the same time, after the marathon bombings, we saw an uptick in shootings in Boston.
Yeah.
Remember that?
Yes, I do remember that.
And there was a countdown. Regardless of what you think about Jamal Crawford, I'm like, he was leading the charge on like really holding the city accountable. Like, what are we doing with like this number? It keeps going up, and at one point it was at like 50 shootings after the marathon bombings, after the first couple of months.
And so quickly, and that's what was scary.
And so, once I noticed that, I was like, wait, we have all these resources going to these folks, but we don't have any resources going to the community for this emergency that's happening right
in the
here,
community,
right?
Exactly.
Right. Which might also be why more emergencies are happening in the community.
That's my theory. No, I have not seen any research on it.
No.
I might have to do some research.
When somebody's not looking.
Yep.
And when somebody's a target and nobody's protecting that target, it's more accessible.
And I would also add in there, like, that maybe there was also some impact on people who are in the community to because of the marathon bombings, right? So like you think about psychological trauma as something that is you have to be like there for it to impact you, when in fact you can be 1,000 miles away from something. We had folks who were part of the survivor community who weren't even there, but like they had a loved one
that was there,
who was there, who was injured, but like, was fine, but the process of them worrying about whether or not that person was alive,
not being able
to find them for days and like all that stuff. So
but I even think about when we were in emergency lockdown, right? So an emergency lockdown works when you're in a safe space. What happens when you're in an emergency lockdown in an unsafe environment? Right? Like what if you're exposed to more trauma solely off of being in a house with somebody who's a perpetrator or somebody who's physically abusing?
Even when they were doing the whole search and they had the city
and it wasn't
on
a
lockdown,
lockdown according to the police department.
Oh, yeah.
I thought that was the word that was said to me. They were like, "Don't leave your house." Isn't that what that is? I'm
state of emergency, whatever they called it.
Like we couldn't go anywhere.
Nobody went anywhere. Like everybody shut down.
It's not even right. And it's like laugh out of discomfort.
I was like, I remember like watching TV and people going online. Social media was very big because you had people listening to like the police scanners. And people were like, "Hey, you're not supposed to be doing that because you're letting people know." And it was the weirdest thing. Even a few days afterwards, there was still police, because I worked in downtown at the time. So you have police still around at the stations and everything, armed guards, dogs and everything. And it still was like on edge for like a good 2 weeks. Anybody you saw walking around, if they had like a coat on them, they were looking at me like, And I never realized I was feeling that until afterwards. I was like, wait, what am I doing? I need to stop doing this. Because I would sit there, I would look at someone and I'm like, you know what, let me keep my eye on
Right.
you or something. And I'm like, I need to stop doing that. I can't be doing this. I'm a black man and I'm doing this to somebody else.
Right.
I need to stop.
You're scared.
Yeah,
You're
but
suspicious.
it happened for a while because
Yep.
what it happened too at the time, the company that I worked for, we had to help the police force and everything, provide them with network and all of that. Because I remember I had to go there and bring a bunch of stuff to them, and I'm like, oh, okay, let's go help them out. One question I did have for you: so for all ACEs, do you work with individuals more, or are you finding yourself working more with companies contacting you to come in and work with them that way?
We have mostly organizations reaching out to us to come work with them, but then part of that work, as far as we're concerned, we believe that you can't do organizational work without doing individual work.
Okay.
It doesn't work any other way. Otherwise, it's just window dressing. So part of what we do with organizations is strategic workshops where we customize. We have a process we go through with organizations. We meet with their leadership, we meet with kind of middle management, and then we meet with a sample of folks who are on the ground,
Yep.
right? Like the folks who are closest to the stuff.
Exactly. Yeah.
And see what are the different perceptions and the experiences people are having in the organization. And that then determines what we focus on for our workshops. And we're doing coaching with
Okay.
leadership, right? One-on-one sessions where we're really breaking down, like the first session is always learning, right? Like what is their understanding of racism? What is their understanding of their role in perpetrating it and addressing or advancing racial equity? What do they really want out of this engagement with us? And so by understanding that, then we can kind of really hone in on filling in the gaps, right? Because we can tell a lot.
Yeah.
Just from that first conversation, we're like, okay, so they're at this level, they kind of have this understanding, but they don't understand this, and therefore, like they don't see their own individual role in not just in perpetuating this stuff, right? Which is how most people are. Most white people don't understand that they are playing a role. Most people of color don't understand that they're playing a role in perpetuating the system of racism, because we all have that stuff in us, right? Like, we all watch movies, the news, all that stuff, and it infects us in ways that we don't realize.
Right.
It's a joke that we have in my house that we used to. It's half joke, half serious. Where when we used to see them dressing like they just walked out of a rap video, we used to be like, "Oh, where'd you get that look from?" And they used to be like, "Oh, it's just fresh, whatever." I used to be like, "Okay, let's go look out the window for a moment and let's just see how many other young men we see wearing similar clothes." Because, obviously you just came up with that by yourself and nothing influenced
Nothing
you.
at all.
And it's just a coincidence that the last 10 young men that walked by in your age range had the same look.
Shirt, top.
And so when we talk about racism and how it works and the role we play to just acknowledge our humanity, we're just people, right? And as part of being people, like, we are flawed. The power of being a human being, though, is that we don't have to live in that space, right? And we can actually grow and learn and evolve in a way that no other living creature on the planet can do. And so, are we really living up to our full human potential if we're not doing that, if we're not self-aware, if we're not managing ourselves? Because what I've learned in doing racism work is that what it really takes to do it are the same things that it takes just to be a good person, to be a better person, to be a better leader, to be a better parent, to be a better wife, husband, whatever the case, like to be a better person, meaning like you're more self-aware. Like you have a better sense of who you are and what you want in the world and how the world impacts you and what you have to manage. So now you're getting into self-management. Like, how do I manage myself in this world? And then how do I manage other people? It means I have to be aware of other people beyond myself.
Right, and how they're feeling, what are their responses like, what ticks them off, like what excites them. Right, and being able to tap into all of that.
Right, and how race plays into all of that.
Right.
So do you find yourself when you're working with these companies that the management and the people that are on the ground have different perspectives?
Yes.
I would imagine, right?
I was going to ask, how often
is it like
that?
upper management is like, these are great, and then on the bottom like, this is terrible.
I mean, we've had one extreme situation like that where it was so night and day between what leadership thought and what the folks on the ground thought.
Uh-huh.
But for the most part, it's like somewhere in between where management knows there's an issue, otherwise they brought us
right.
in, right? But they don't usually have full context on it.
Gotcha.
Right? And so by talking to people on the ground who are like on the receiving end of policies and practices and, you know, whatever whims of leadership they have from day to day, then you get a chance to see, all right, how is this impacting real people's lives? When I show up in the office place and what the office culture is, right? Which is nothing more than, which is not separate from everything else the organization does. The culture is the how, right? It's everything. It's how the organization does everything it does. Right? And so when I walk through the doors, if I don't understand the organizational culture as a person of color, right? I don't understand whiteness as this this standard or this norm that's all over this office, and I don't get the obsession with like everything being in writing, and I don't get the perfectionism and the you know, all of these different things that show up in the office place as culture, and usually it's default culture, right? It's not even, oh, this is a culture we've created. It's just
the way it is.
It's just the default culture because it's been infected with the rest of society, right? And so until leadership and the folks who work in organization are able to work collectively, say like, what do we want our culture to be, and be intentional about it, you see the same things you see in the rest of society, right? I mean, you can go on YouTube and see instances of, you know, people working in offices and people leaving nooses at their desk, and you know, like all types of things.
That just happened.
Like
That's TSA just happened.
That's one example, right? I was thinking about one from like a year ago, right? So it's like these kinds of things, and it's just like, and then leadership is like, oh, we don't tolerate that in our culture. It's like, well,
did you find out who did it? What happened to them? What was the response? Did the community get contacted?
And what is it about this organization where someone feels like it's okay to do that?
To do
right,
that.
Right.
So that means you do not have an intentional culture.
Right, and it's not felt. Right, not that way.
And how often are leadership taking accountability and willing to change that you see when you're working with them? Or is it one of those, well, you know, kind of like, I wouldn't say denial, but saying it exists, but not actually. Exactly.
Right. So the work we do isn't just about addressing instances of racism that are, you know, overt and obvious. It's also the more subtle stuff, like, you know, gee, when I look at the hierarchy of your organization, all the people of color at the bottom, right? When we look at the differences in the way people get treated or who gets access to professional development and like all of these things.
Who's being mentored.
Who's exactly.
The opportunities.
You know, it all shows up. And so our work really is to coach folks in being able to own their humanity and get comfortable with it. Like, it's okay. Like, what we really do is normalize stuff for people. Right? We say, okay, you're a white person. As a white person, everything that you're thinking and experiencing and about to say to me is normal. So you will not offend me, but I need you to ask me all the questions that you have. Right? I need you to make sure that you understand, you have a handle on these issues, because you now have to then go and implement.
You have a responsibility.
Once I leave,
you have a responsibility. And so our work isn't to come in and try to fix anything.
Right.
Our work is to
provide you with the tools.
Build your knowledge, skills, and tools, and your use of those tools so that you can create the kind of culture that is important for everybody in an organization to thrive. Because here's the part of the hustle. People try to make racism about saving people of color. When you look at what people of color are going through in an organization, for example, it's not that they're the only ones experiencing the stuff they're experiencing. It's just worse for us, right? It's always worse for us. But when it's really shitty for us, excuse my language.
No, that's no problem.
it's also really bad for everybody else, for a lot of other people, except for the folks who figured out how to navigate, except for the folks who have privilege, relationships with leadership, and all the stuff. We grew up together, whatever, right? They figured out how to navigate. And so by addressing issues of racism, you're actually helping a lot of other people, because the root causes, the systemic, institutional, structural, policy, programmatic stuff, all those things are causing harm to other people too.
Right.
And then the other piece is kind of how white people are impacted by racism. And so, you know, there's this, before I go to that, there's this other piece around people of color that we never talk about, because I think I have allergic reaction sometimes to it, where folks say, you know, white people need to do the work, they need to do the work.
What's the work?
First of all, do you even know what that means? Second of all, what work are you doing? Right?
Yes.
Because let me tell you, tomorrow white people could let go of whiteness and racism and be like, all right. We were just playing. We sorry. We all enlightened now.
Still the same old ignorant stuff.
Right. we gonna do the thing, right? We would still be holding on to racism and whiteness as people of color, because we've been infected too. So unless we are also getting racism up out of us, getting whiteness out of us, decolonizing ourselves as, you know, if you're an immigrant, right? Because every place in the world except for 14 countries was colonized by Europe. So everyone has the same types of mentalities and attitudes, especially the anti-blackness, right? Like that's all baked into it internationally. But there's, until we do that work, like, how dare we, like, try to challenge everybody else to do all this work? It's like, you have to do the work too.
We have a responsibility.
We have a responsibility,
right?
Right. And so, you know, James Baldwin had a great saying where I'm not going to try to remember it word for word because it was a long letter he wrote to his nephew. But he did talk a lot about our responsibility as people of color, especially Black people, in leading the charge of advancing racial equity. Right? That who else is supposed to lead it?
Right.
Who else is supposed to build their knowledge and their skills and language to talk about these issues? Right. And so, you know, it's our struggle, and we should have a vision for what it means to come up on the other end, not struggling anymore.
Right.
And if we don't have that, then what are we, you know, and what are we, you know, expecting from white people when we don't communicate to them when they cross the line and have, you know, committed offenses against our dignity?
Absolutely.
Right? Those are skills and knowledge that I know I had to build, right? I just admitted that when it came to emergency management, like I didn't have the language at first to be able to be in these spaces and
To be
speak
able to
up,
navigate,
right? And
right.
navigate in a way where it's like, no, I need you to hear me.
Right.
That took time. And it
But
was
also
skill.
to not be afraid that you're in a hostile work environment. So like if you were to say something, that automatically means that you're fired, because I think that's part of it, right? When you're in a position where you don't feel like you have job security solely off of, maybe the comment came from the director, maybe the comment came from the executive director, the CEO. It's like, if I call them out on this, am I going to now be in a position where I'm
which is a high possibility, because the normal dynamics of that is
you don't say anything.
Well, no, is that when there's an offense against us, right? As a Black woman, when there's an offense against me, if I speak up to the white person who is the perpetrator, they get defensive, and then they get all emotional, and then somehow I become the problem. Right? So
It's
now
your
I'm
fault.
the problem.
Right.
I'm the fault for bringing up the fact that you crossed the line.
Right.
And so how do we develop the type of language and knowledge and skills, not just around race and racism, but around ourselves? What is that red line for you where you're going to speak up? How do you practice what it means to speak up? What do you say? That's not only, oh, that was racist. It's like, okay, we need more sophisticated language to be able to get to the hypocrisy of the situation, right? Because that means that you also have to know the policies of the organization. You got to understand the institution and how it works. Not just what it says on paper, but how it really works.
And who's in the, like when you say something to so and so, Is it staying there? Is it traveling? Who is it traveling to? How do they receive it? How do they then deliver it? Right.
That part. And what can you actually fire me for? Right. Because if I know the rules of the game, then I have a certain level of freedom, right, to be able to speak up when those things show up and not feel like, oh my God, you know, I'm gonna lose my job and all this stuff. It's like if I know the rules,
right,
and I'm confident, I'm like, no, I've seen this play out before. Like not just I read it, like I've seen it play out. This is how it works. This is how it goes. I got the game. When it shows up, then I can speak on it, and I can not just say. And I never say the word racist, because that's the place where it lands you. You bring up the hypocrisy of the situation, which is what most of our experiences are, right, in the workplace. So if I was supposed to get a promotion and the rules say this is how the promotion works, and I didn't get it and somebody else got it, then I can go back to the playbook and say, hey,
this is
just calling this out, right? So how is it possible that this person got promoted and I didn't when A, B, C, D? Now, don't stop there and say, so let's talk about how you're going to fix this, right? I'm going to hold you accountable to your rules, because those are the rules that you came up with. And so the more we can understand and learn that in an organization, which means you have to understand the culture, which is usually, you know, the foundation is like in whiteness. And if you Google, go in the Googly thing and look up white supremacy culture, especially in organizations, you'll see there's a pattern, right? And you can get a sense of what to expect, because as people of color, we also, and as Black people in particular, we have to prepare ourselves for the world as it is while we work to create the world we want.
That's so real. And I think on that note too, my last question to you is going to focus on, so I know you're focusing on race in the workplace, and I think in many ways too, knowing that you've now been exposed to so many people in the professional workspace, we still have a city of people who might not have been in the spaces that you're working with, right? With the and might not even be in the professions of individuals that you've worked with. I don't know how much time it'll take, but in your thoughts, right? How would you describe race and racism in Boston? I've heard you speak before, and you say that Boston, you know, you don't want to hear people talk about how Boston is the most racist city, because again, every place has their own type of racism. But how would you describe race in Boston? And maybe 2 or 3 tangible steps a person can take in their day-to-day lives, not necessarily in a professional role, although it can be, to navigate racism in Boston, or race dynamics in Boston.
So race dynamics, it's racism, right? We just want to say racism, right? And so first thing, Boston is the progressive Northeast, and the dynamics of racism in the progressive Northeast is predominantly microaggressions, right? Which show up in lots of different ways, including getting passed over for promotions and like all that stuff, because it's wrapped up in assumptions people make around who we are and how we're supposed to be. All that said, I think the key for us to be able to navigate is kind of related to what I said before, right? You have to know yourself. You have to know your own culture. You have to know your own history. You have to know who you are, what you believe in, why you believe in, where you got it from, so that you know that when you stand in the world, you're standing with both your feet planted. And we have to prepare ourselves to deal with white people, right? So that we can maintain our own mental health. We should just expect from white people that they are going to be racially ignorant. They're going to be ignorant around racism. They're going to have certain stereotypes. There's stereotypes we believe about ourselves.
Exactly.
Right? So, of course, white people believe those things too. And so, and the reason I'm saying that is because we have to protect our mental health. We should never be surprised when we have certain experiences. We should be surprised when we don't, right? And so when you're in these spaces, so that's the first piece. The second piece is, what are the things that we can do within our communities let me start first with in our own lives that we have agency over, right? Because we have a tendency to internalize the powerlessness of racism. And that means that it feels like I don't have control over my life. That's what it makes you feel like. And that's what everybody's telling you. You don't have any power. You don't, but we do have power, right? That starts with ourselves. And it starts with that understanding of ourselves, but also being able to practice agency. If I need a job, I'm gonna get my ass up and I'm gonna get out here and I'm gonna find myself a job, right? I'm not gonna wait for someone to come and hand me one, right? And so that's one piece of it. And then the other piece is, and I'm gonna do all the things it takes to get from point A to point Z, right? And it is gonna, however long it takes. But what makes that process easier is when we're connected to other people who understand things in similar ways that we understand them, who can support us and who we can support each other as we're trying to navigate, because life is hard, life is real, and you need other people that really have your back in order to thrive, especially if you're Black. You need to have people who you can talk to about these issues. I'm gonna be like, oh, shut up about that racism stuff, whatever, right? And then the other layer is, what are the things that we can do within groups, right? I don't mean collectively, the whole Black community, that Million Man March kind of, concept of ways to get to action, is not realistic, right? We have to have a coalition of the willing, right? I'm quoting George Bush, I know. But we do have to have a coalition of the willing who are not going to always be dependent on government and in other institutions. And when problems show up, we go run to the mayor, we go run to these other people to fix things. And I'm not saying we don't do those things. It's an and strategy, right? We also have to be doing everything we can do within our own power and resources in our own communities.
Talk about it.
So, and that's the piece, and that's hard, right? Because again, freedom's not free. So, in order to really own the steps and actions that we need to take in order to create that world that we want, we have to be the ones to do it. No one else can do it for us. No one else can give you your freedom. It doesn't work that way. And so so that's that piece. And then the last thing I'll say on the issue is to love yourself and love other people. And I'm not saying that internalized racism is you hate yourself. That's a way oversimplification, just like racism is about hate. Like that, those are oversimplifications. What I mean by love yourself is love, this is for Black people, love your Blackness. Love who you are. Nobody wants to be Black. I get it, because the world told us that that's something that we're not supposed to be proud of or excited about, but there's so much biologically and from a cultural perspective and just from a resilience perspective that is to be admired and loved and tapped into, so that we can be our fullest human self.
And I love all of that. And I think, when the last comment you made about learning to love yourself and love your Blackness is so real, because that self-hate, though, like that inability to do that starts so young. And it's not just as an adult or as a teenager. And just today, actually, I kid you not, a friend of mine was telling me how her daughter, who's 5 years old, said, is a little girl of color, said, I want to be white. And I want to do things this way. They have it easier, it's nicer, it seems more inviting. She's 5, right? And so, my friend was hurt, and she's like, I don't know what to say, I don't know what to do. And this little girl is in spaces where she's around a lot of melanin, beautiful young boys and girls, but she still feels this way, right? And so it's like, where is this coming from? What is this conditioning? What are these, where's she receiving these messages from, right? That's telling her that this is still better, even though she's in spaces predominantly occupied by people of color.
Because people of color are affected with that stuff too,
right?
And we say things to each other like, "Why don't you fix your hair?" Like when you have natural hair, someone's trying to tell you that your hair's not done, right? Or you only hear a positive comment about how pretty you are when your hair is straight. So you don't hear how pretty you are when your hair is curly. So you automatically associate that with
beauty.
Right. Or, you know, and so you can go down the list, but
Right.
we give messages to our kids all the time, even when we don't mean to, just the way white people do.
Life would be so much easier if we were white.
Yeah.
White people wouldn't even have to go through this stuff, right?
Right.
Those messages.
So, and it's not to say that we shouldn't say those things. We have to contextualize them, right? And so we have to celebrate the good about us. And we have to acknowledge that we do live in a real world. Like, we do live in a society where white people and whiteness and kind of white supremacy. I don't use that word in trainings, but that's what we're talking about. Like, white supremacy is the culture of the land, right? It's the law of the land. It's the politics of the land. It's the everything of the land. And if we are not honest with our children about that, they will be ill prepared to enter into this world and thrive in spite of that. But we have to do both, right? Like, we also have to do the hard work of teaching our children about how beautiful it is to be Black. Like, we have a rich history, we have a rich present day. There's so much that doesn't ever get talked about by us and in the media, of amazing things that Black people are doing all the time, every day, in lots of different spaces. And so until we start to own shifting the narrative for ourselves, until we start to do that hard work of giving our children an alternative to whiteness, then, you know, we will be on this hamster wheel of racism, not just in terms of coming from white people, but that internalization of that whiteness.
Absolutely.
So we always like to end the show by asking the guests, where can the collective, whether they follow you on social media or how they can get in touch with you if they would need your help in your company for what you do?
So allacesinc.com, just as it sounds, allacesinc.com is our website. We're actually rolling out an online learning community. We currently use it with our clients already, but we're rolling it out as a membership learning community this fall, late fall. So we're excited about that, and that's going to be, we originally were going to call it dynamicimpact.com. And we've since done some research and study and said, you know, that's not the easiest thing to type into the URL. And so, which is blindingly obvious, but anyways, so we also have intentionallyact.com.
Okay.
We have two other ones that leads all to the same place.
Okay.
We'll give you options, you know, whatever you remember.
We remember exactly.
Don'treact.com
I like that one.
and advanceracialequity.com. They all lead to the online learning community. And then the last piece is Twitter. So my Twitter handle is @BostonAtyia, ATYIA. And our business Twitter is @allaces_inc.
Awesome.
All
Well,
right.
thank you so much, Dr. Atyia, for your time, for talking to us about your journey and how you've been able to maneuver through some of the traditional ways and untraditional, non-conventional ways of really being out in the workforce, right? And really understanding the impacts of health and wellness and responses to chaos and to trauma and just to unhealthy dynamics that really plague, I think, you know, all people, but again, unfairly mistreat people of color. So thank you so much for your time talking to us about race and education and the work that we also have. For all of our listeners out there, I would also say one of the lessons I know I took away from you, Atyia, is that this is not just a conversation about what white people can do for us, but also a conversation about what people of color can do for themselves. And so again, you know, we don't have to live in that like post-slave mentality where we always feel like we need to be grateful and honored and silent in spaces. It's like, how can we truly build together? So thank you so much for your time, for all of your work. So all aces, check them out.
Yes, y'all.